extremely well this evening. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be doing a bit of a fusion of the bedtime stories and the scary stories. I was having a look through this book and it turns out there's some pretty disturbing fairy tales in here. So I found 3 horrifying ones that I want to be sharing with you this evening. Are you ready for the first one? The first story is quite a short one, and it is called Frau Trude, which is like Lady Trude. There once was a little girl who was obstinate and inquisitive, and when her parents told her to do anything, she did not obey them. So how could she possibly fare well? One day she said to her parents, "I have heard so much of Frau Trude. I will go to her someday. People say that everything about her does look so strange, and that there are such odd things in her house that I have become quite curious." Her parents absolutely forbade her from going into that house, and they said, "Frau Trude is a bad woman who does wicked things, and if you go to her, you are no longer our child." Typical parents, am I right? But the maiden did not let herself be turned aside by her parents' prohibition, and still went to Frau Trude. And when she got to her, Frau Trude said, "Why are you so pale?" That's what I imagine Frau Trude's voice sounds like, by the way. She replied, and her whole body trembled. "I have been so terrified at what I have seen." "What have you seen?" asked Frau Trude. "I saw a black man on your steps." "That was a collier," she said. "Then I saw a green man." "Oh, that was a huntsman," she said. "After that I saw a blood-red man." "Ah, that was a butcher," she said. Frau Trude, I was terrified. I looked through the window and I saw not you, but, as I verily believe, the devil himself with a head of fire." "Oh," said she, "then you have seen the witch in her proper costume. I have been waiting for you and wanting you a long time already. You shall give me some light." story. Time for the next one. The next story is called The Robber Bridegroom. Buckle up. There was once upon a time a miller who had a beautiful daughter, and as she was grown up, he wished that she was provided for and well married. He thought, if any good suitor comes and asks for her, I will give her to him. Not long afterwards, a suitor came who appeared to be very rich, and as the miller had no fault to find with him, he promised his daughter to him. The maiden, however, did not like him quite so much as a girl should like the man to whom she is engaged, and had no confidence in him. Whenever she saw or thought of him, she felt a secret horror. Once he said to her, "You are my betrothed, and yet you have never once paid me a visit." The maiden replied, "I do not know where your house is." Then said the bridegroom, "My house is out there in the dark forest." She tried to excuse herself and said she could not find the way there. Now the bridegroom said, "Next Sunday you must come out there to me. I have already invited the guests, and I will strew ashes in order that you may find your way through the forest." When Sunday came and the maiden had to set out on her way, she became very uneasy. She herself knew not exactly why, and to mark her way, she filled both her buckets full of peas and lentils, as they do in these stories. Ashes were strewn at the entrance of the forest, and these she followed, but at every step she threw a couple of peas on the ground. She walked almost the whole day until she reached the middle of the forest, where it was the darkest, and there stood a solitary house, which she did not like, for it looked so dark and dismal. She went inside it, but no one was within, and the most absolute stillness reigned. Suddenly, a voice cried, turn back, young maiden dear. 'Tis a murderer's house you enter here." The maiden looked up and saw that the voice came from a bird which was hanging in a cage on the wall. And once again it cried, turn back, young maiden dear. 'Tis a murderer's house you enter here." Then the young maiden went on farther from one room to another and walked through the whole house, but it was entirely empty, and not one other human being was to be found. At last she came to the cellar, and there sat an extremely aged woman, whose head shook constantly. "Can you not tell me," said the maiden, "if my betrothed lives here?" "Alas, poor child," replied the woman, "whither have you come? You are in a murderer's den. You think you are a bride, soon to be married, but you will keep your wedding with death." and lamentations, they gave her wine to drink, 3 glasses full, 1 glass of white, 1 glass of red, and a glass of yellow wine. And with this her heart burst in twain. That girl cannot hold her drink. Thereupon they tore off her delicate raiment, lay her on a table, and cut her beautiful body into pieces, and strewed salt thereon. The poor bride behind the cask trembled and shook, for she saw right well what fate the robbers had destined for her. One of them noticed a gold ring on the little finger of the murdered girl, and as it would not come off at once, he took an axe and cut the finger off, but it sprang up into the air away over the cask and fell straight into the bride's bosom. The robber took a candle and wanted to look for it, but he could not find it. Then another one of them said, "Have you looked behind the great hogshead?" But the old woman cried, "Come and get something to eat and leave off looking till the morning. The finger won't run away from you." Then the robber said, "The old woman is right," and gave up their search and sat down to eat. And the old woman poured a sleeping draught in their wine, so that they soon lay down in the cellar and slept and snored. When the bride heard that, she came out from behind the hogshead and had to step over the sleepers, for they lay in rows on the ground, and great was her terror lest she should not wake one of them. But God helped her, and she got safely over. The old woman went up with her, opened the doors, and they hurried out of the murderer's den with all the speed in their power. The wind had blown away the strewn ashes, but the peas and lentils had sprouted and grown up and showed them the way in the moonlight. They walked the whole night until in the morning they arrived at the mill, and then the maiden told her father everything exactly as it had happened. When the day came for the wedding to be celebrated, the bridegroom appeared, and the miller had invited all his relations and friends. As they sat at a table, each was bidden to relate something. The bride sat still and said nothing. Then said the bridegroom to the bride, "Come, my darling, do you know nothing? Relate something to us like everyone else." She replied, "Then I will relate a dream. I was walking alone through a wood, and at last I came to a house in which no living soul was. But on the wall there was a bird in a cage, which cried, 'Turn back, my maiden dear, 'tis a murderer's house you enter here.' And this it cried once more. My darling, I only dreamt this. Then I went through all the rooms, and they were all empty, and there was something so horrible about them. At last I went down into the cellar, and there sat a very, very old woman, whose head shook. I asked her, 'Does my bridegroom live in this house?' She answered, 'Alas, poor child, you have got into a murderer's den. Your bridegroom does live here, but he will hew you in pieces and kill you, and then he will cook you and eat you.' My darling, scarcely I was hidden when the robbers came home, dragging a maiden with them, to whom they gave 3 kinds of wines to drink, white, red, and yellow, with which her heart broke in twain. My darling, I only dreamt this. Thereupon they pulled off her pretty clothes and hewed her fair body in pieces on a table and sprinkled them with salt. My darling, I only dreamt this, and one of the robbers saw that there was still a ring on her little finger, and as it was hard to draw off, he took an axe and cut it off. But the finger sprang up in the air and sprang behind the great hogshead and fell into my bosom. And here is the finger with the ring. And with these words she drew it forth and showed it to those present. The robber, who had during this story become as pale as ashes, leapt up and wanted to escape, but the guests held him fast and delivered him over to justice. Then he and his whole troop were executed for their infamous deeds. As you can see, there are some pretty disturbing tales in this book of fairy tales. Not all of them are meant for children. Shall I tell you the last one? Alright. This story is called The Juniper Tree. It is now long ago, quite 2,000 years since there was a rich man who had a beautiful and pious wife, and they loved each other dearly. They had, however, no children, though they wished for them very much, and the woman prayed for them day and night, but they still had none. Now there was a courtyard in front of their house in which there stood a juniper tree, and one day in the winter the woman was standing beneath it, paring herself an apple, and while she was paring herself the apple, she cut her finger, and the blood fell on the snow. Ah, said the woman, and sighed right heavily, and looked at the blood before her, and was most unhappy. Ah, if I had but a child as red as blood and as white as snow. Now I know what you're thinking, and you are thinking that this sounds an awful lot like Snow White, and I agree it does, but it's not the same story, so bear with me. And while she thus spoke, she became quite happy in her mind, and felt just as if that were going to happen. So basically she got magically impregnated at this point. Then she went into the house, and a month went by. That's like our life now during the whole corona crisis. And the snow was gone, and 2 months, and then everything was green, and 3 months, and then all the flowers came out of the earth, and 4 months, and then all the trees in the wood grew thicker, and the green branches were all closely entwined, and the birds sang until the wood resounded, and the blossoms fell from the trees. was over, the fruit was large and fine, and then she was quite still. In the 7th month she snatched all the juniper berries and ate them greedily. Then she grew sick and sorrowful. Then the 8th month passed, and she called her husband to her and wept and said, "If I die, then bury me beneath the juniper tree." Then she was quite comforted and happy until the next month was over, and then she had a child, as white as snow and as red as blood. And when she beheld it, she was so delighted that she died, which is a bit random if you ask me. Then her husband buried her beneath the juniper tree, and he began to weep sore. After some time he was more at ease, and though he still wept, he could bear it. And after some time longer he took another wife. By the second wife he had a daughter, but the first wife's child was a little son, and he was as red as blood and as white as snow. When the woman looked at her daughter, she loved her very much, but then she looked at the little boy, and it seemed to cut her to the heart. For the thought came to her mind that he would always stand in her way, and she was forever thinking how she could get all the fortune for her daughter, and the evil one filled her mind with this till she was quite wroth with the little boy, and she pushed him from one corner to the other, and slapped him here and cuffed him there, until the poor child was in continual terror, for when he came out of school he had no peace in any place. One day the woman had gone upstairs to her room, and her little daughter went up too and said, "Mother, give me an apple." "Yes, my child," said the woman, and gave her a fine apple out of the chest. But the chest had a great heavy lid with a great sharp iron lock. "Mother," said the daughter, "is brother not to have one too?" This made the woman angry, but she said yes, when he comes out of school. And when she saw from the window that he was coming in, it was just as if the devil entered into her, and she snatched the apple and took it away again from her daughter and said, "You shall not have one before your brother." Then she threw the apple into the chest and shut it. Then the little boy came in at the door, and the devil made her say to him kindly, "My son, will you have an apple?" And she looked wickedly at him. "Mother," said the little boy, "how dreadful you look." "Yes, give me an apple." Then it seemed to her as if she were forced to say to him, "Come with me." And she opened the lid of the chest and said, "Take out an apple for yourself." And while the little boy was stooping inside, the devil prompted her, and crash, she shut the lid, and his head flew off and fell among the apples. Then she was overwhelmed with terror and thought, "If I could but make them think that it was not done by me." So she went upstairs to her room, to a chest of drawers, and took a white handkerchief out of the top drawer, so that nothing could be seen, and she sat him on a chair in front of the door this before, came into the kitchen to her mother, who was standing by the fire with a pan of hot water before her, which she was constantly stirring around. "Mother," said Ma Lincoln, "brother is sitting at the door, and he looks quite white and has an apple in his hand. I asked him to give me the apple, but he did not answer me, and I was quite frightened." "Go back to him," said her mother, "and if he will not answer you, give him a box on the ear." So Ma Lincoln went back to him and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But he was silent, and she gave him a box on the ear, whereupon his head fell off. Ma Lincoln was terrified and began crying and screaming, and ran to her mother and said, "Alas, mother, I have knocked my brother's head off." And she wept and wept and could not be comforted. "Ma Lincoln," said the mother, "what have you done? But be quiet and let no one know it. It cannot be helped now. We will make him into black puddings." Then the mother took the little boy and chopped him in pieces, put him into the pan, and made him into black pudding. But Ma Lincoln stood by, weeping and weeping, and all her tears fell into the pan, and there was no need of any salt. These stories do make me laugh sometimes. But then the father came home and sat down to dinner and said, "Where is my son?" And the mother served up a great dish of black puddings, and Ma Lincoln wept and could not leave off. Then the father once again said, "But where is my son?" "Ah," said the mother, "he has gone across the country to his mother's great uncle. He will stay there a while." "And what is he going to do there? He did not even say goodbye to me." "Oh, he wanted to go and asked me if he might stay 6 weeks. He is well taken care of there." Ah, said the man, "I feel so unhappy lest all should not be right. He ought to have said goodbye to me." With that, he began to eat and said, "Ma Lincoln, why are you crying? Your brother will certainly come back." Then he said, "Ah, wife, how delicious this food is. Give me some more." And the more he ate, the more he wanted to have, and he said, "Give me some more. You shall have none of it. It seems to me as if it were all mine." And then he ate and ate and threw all the bones under the table until he had finished the whole. Those were the 3 horrible, disturbing stories that I have for you this evening. I hope you enjoyed this video.